So what we're going to do is, I just feel like I have to share some information for the people that live in New York, true New Yorkers, and when I say that, it's not that, the new people are fake New Yorkers. I'm just saying, people who've lived here for a very long time, through its rough times, and now it's good times. I know a lot of people going through situations where they reside at, where they live at, and having to deal with landlords and new landlords and all this stuff going on, and trying to get people out of where they live so that they could raise the rents to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. So we're gonna do this segment to help people who's lived here for a long time, because there's a lot of new landlords that take over buildings and acquire leases or ownership of buildings, and you may have been living there your whole life, and maybe pay a reasonable amount for the wages that you make. And it really doesn't matter, But the point is there's rent subsidized apartments that enable certain people to afford to live in a certain community or their building. You're just comfortable there. You lived there your whole life, or it's your family apartment building. You just want you want to live there. Sometimes these landlords, maybe they're not greedy, but for some reason they wind up raising your rent from something reasonable. Maybe who knows? It could be, some people pay $200 a month, maybe $700, $800, $900, maybe $1,000 a month, and these new landlords come and they want to raise it to $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month, and it's like it's ludicrous at a certain point, So what they do is they try to get you out of the apartment. They play games with you, and that way they could get you out and bring a new tenant in and charge them the skyrocketing rent.
You know what? In a particular building that I live in currently, the rent used to be pretty fair. I would say 3-bedroom was like $700 and some change, close to $800.
Right.
Currently, it's at
$5,000,
$6,000.
$6,000. I was close.
It's very close. $6,000. And what I've noticed is that a lot of people they get brought out.
Yeah.
Some left before the offer was even there.
Right.
But what I'm getting at is the people the new residents, they'll come into the building.
And they'll look at you like, who the hell are you? How are you living?
Not even just that, but they'll come into the building and they'll leave 4 months later because they can't even compete. They can't keep up pace with the rent.
They can't pay the rent.
So it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting dynamic, to say the least, because even though the property value in this neighborhood has increased, people who are trying to live in a stable environment,
a decent life,
economically, they can't compete with the rates of the prices.
That's because this New York City is ran by a billionaire mayor who has absolutely nothing in common. It's absolutely not in touch with the average New Yorker. He definitely has a lot in common with big business, land development companies. That's what he does. I'm sure he gets paid a couple of bucks to make sure that they could bend the rules to build all these new structures and buildings.
I heard a little story.
Have a lot of apartments in them, but they're just out of the price range of the average New York City worker, the one that works hard and pays taxes. And so that's what this segment is about. It's about speaking about this situation and what you could do to help yourselves in these situations, or to better explain your rights as a tenant in a rent-stabilized apartment, rent-stabilized or rent-controlled apartment. So basically, the landlords do these things. Why? It's not because they love you. It's because they want to make extra money. They want to make extra money that's ridiculous and charge ridiculous amounts of money for the living space. Why? Because they're young, savvy, and they just think this is the way of America or the way of New York, and it's a great thing. There's a lot of apartments that new buildings that have been built, and they can't even be filled up because I call them greedy landlords. You can call them what you want, nice landlords, reasonable people, but to me they're greedy landlords, and no one could afford it. So, in my case, where I had, I was being denied, they did not want to acknowledge me as a tenant in my apartment. And so I said, well, you know what, I know I've lived here forever. Before this current land management company owned the premises, I've been living here before that. So I had to figure out, well, what happens is they start to deny your rent checks. And if you don't pay rent, then they'll take you to court and say, hey, judge, they didn't pay the rent. We want them out.
So with the rent you sent them, where would it go?
Well, originally it was going into the landlord's daughter's. I was sending it to her, P.O. box, addressed to her. And that was fine. I've never had a problem. But once her father passed away, who was the owner, landlord, once he passed away, something happens. When that person passes away, all of their assets, all the land, all the properties that they own, goes into like a bucket. And now it goes into something called an estate. We're going to call that bucket an estate. So everything that he owned goes into this bucket. And depending on if they have children or not, or if they have a will, this has to be decided where all the contents, where all the apartments, all the properties, whatever this guy owned, it's all in a bucket. Now, it's in this estate, a bucket. Now they have to figure out who gets what. What are you going to do with all the stuff in the bucket? So if they do have a child or children, they have to decide amongst themselves who's going to get what, unless he wrote it down on paper who gets what. In my case, he has a daughter who gets to inherit his estate. So now's the chance where I guess she has to make a decision on what she wants to do with these properties that was left to her. This is my situation. There's a lot of different situations with landlords. This is just mine. And so anyway, I spoke with her and she said, hey, I told her, listen, I heard your father passed away. He was a really swell guy. I met the landlord. He was really cool. And she goes, yes, unfortunately he passed away. I said, well, my condolences. Where do we go on from here? How do I continue paying my rent? I hope there's not going to be a problem. And she was pretty reasonable, and she said, well, being that situation happened, you can now, you don't no longer have to pay me as rent, as a manager of the apartment. Just send it to the company. And so I followed her wishes, and I sent the check to this new. To me, it was a new company, a new address. I've never sent my rent to this place. So I did as she asked, and well, next thing you know, that's where the small problem began. And they denied my checks. They denied acknowledging me as a tenant to this apartment. So that's where I had to take it upon myself to make a decision. Am I going to let them punk me around and push me out of where I was born and raised? Or am I going to learn my rights so I could fight this off? So if you're living in an apartment and you're not the original person that signed the lease or the agreement, but you want to maintain and you want to stay in that apartment. It happens a lot. Your mother or father might move. They're the original person that signed it. So you have to make sure that they notify the landlord, and there's a certain form that you need for this. This is going to help you if you go to court or if they try to evict you. You're going to have this piece of proof that's going to be filled out by the person who lives in the apartment before they move or pass on. It's great proof. It's actually what you need. It'll hold up in court really great. You can get it at www.housingnyc.com. So that's www.housingnyc.com. And that's where you go to get all this information on your rights as a tenant. So here you're going to find a form, which is over here. And it's the form, you could Google it, RA-235. Basically, as a tenant, you send that to your landlord to let them know, hey, this is my son, and he resides at the apartment with me. This lets the people know that you live on the premises. You might not be the signee on the original lease, or the person, your name might not be the one that's on the original document of the agreement of the apartment, but it's notifying the landlord that you live there. Now, if you want to maintain the residency and you want to stay in the apartment when your parent or whoever is on the lease leaves, you only get to stay there, and you only have rights to succession. You only have rights to stay there if, this is the one condition, you have to be living on that premises for at least 2 years. And a lot of people say, yeah, well, all right, cool, I'll live here for 2 years. If you get taken to court, subpoenaed to court, they call you into court to try to evict you, the judge is going to say, well, how can you prove to me that you lived there for 2 years? A lot of people get caught in this situation because they know their parent or family member is going to move, and they figure, let me just hop in a month before you leave, and that's not going to work. You need utility bills in your name for at least 2 years, okay? And this is going to help you. So remember, if you're going through a situation where you're expecting to maintain and stay somewhere because your parents moving or they're sick, might pass on, make sure that you go online to www.housingnyc.com and download this succession form. It's going to help you out, and it's RA-235. So that's the lesson today for the true New Yorkers who live here, who might be getting pushed out of their apartment or premises because of greedy landlords that have a lot in common with the mayor. So, because he doesn't do anything to fight for these situations or put limits on what developers and landlords can charge for rent. So, that's today's lesson for my everyday peoples.